So now we're kind of summing up this plot right here. So when it comes to pump selection, kind of have a gist of what we're going to see. So I think I have here, it's 15, here. Q. So this is that small scale NPS required, right? So here kind of just looks like this. Required, right? So everything should happen really above this line. Any sort of intersection, all intersection points definitely have to happen above these lines. That's the takeaway of this lower bound one right here. And then you have the ideal sort of pump equation, right? Remember, this was the line that we did last time. You'll have actual, and then you have the other one, the big classic one, where okay, and this is the system curve. So here is my pump performance curve, my non-positive suction head required curve, and then here is, call this system curve. And then on top of that, if you're not lost enough, then there's a second axis right here, which just goes from 0 to 1, right? And this is the efficiency axis right here, okay? So on this one, you actually have this curve like that. This is an efficiency curve, right? At no flow rates, you have no efficiency. At this maximum flow rate, there's no head, so there's no efficiency there as well. But we'll get into more of these curves. I just want to put them all up there, then you can kind of see. So, right, the ideal ones, just for approximation, really you have these polynomial curve downs, right? So I should just erase this one so you can see better, right? The ideal is really just good for maybe estimating. Sometimes they actually look ideal. You'd be surprised, but let's just say they always look like this. Okay, there are two intersection points then. I have this one, which is the intersection of pump and the intersection of the system curve. These two curves intersect at one point. That's this thing. And there's also this one. This curve is the intersection of, so this is this intersection of the pump curve and the efficiency curve. So we have two intersection points we have to care about. This one and this one. So this one, before I maybe even describe this is called an operating point. Right, the intersection of the pump and the system curve is your operating point. And then this one we call BEP, best efficiency point. Okay, so these are what we're going to describe and we have to use in terms of selecting pumps. Right, looking at really these two intersection points and weighing the options is what it all comes down to. Because this operating point, right, scale that down, right, you see that there's two flow rates here. There's QO, Q operating point, and then there's flow rate BEP, right? This flow rate is based on the pump's characteristics, the pump's designs, the pump's right, the pump manufacturing. This flow rate is based on the system's design, the pipes, the turns, the curves, etc. So you have to balance these two where your system has a best operating point and then the pump has a best operating point. So I think we all understand maybe where you want to end up with these pump ideas is get these close. Okay, so that's a graph. Now we can just explain in words and write out the graphs we're going to have, right? Right, there is this curve right here. Function of Q, right? The purpose of this curve, right, is we want to say right? Make all intersections occur above. Really make all the curves, right? Really these curves, so make all of the curves operate above at least this bottom curve. It's a lower bound for your designs, right? Then we have the pump curve. Okay, what was the point of that? Use line. Okay, this one is describing pump performance. So this pump curve is describing the pump's performance and right the pump's performance based on the system or the way it was designed. How about that? Pump performance. Characteristic pump curve is actually what it's called, right? Then we have a system curve, right? And this is your This is really your piping system. So piping performance, right? Let's say that. Okay, this is I'll describe what that system curve really is, and you'll see that your project was really just looking at that thing. But this is this idea of what this is the performance of the piping system, or the limitations on that. And then there's also this efficiency curve. Right? And I like this, this efficiency curve is also a measure of the pump's performance. So, but this is a sort of a measure of, this is really, it's about cost, right? Because this is measuring sort of like what you paid for and what you get. So it's a ratio of, power gained by fluid over power supplied to the shaft. Ideally, if it was 1, that'd be great, but it's not. So I'm going to write that down, So the efficiency curve, what it really is measuring is power to fluid over power to the rotational shaft. This is the thing you're paying for. This is what Mother Nature takes from the pump. So, if they were the same, that'd be great. All the power that you put in to turn the shaft goes directly to the fluid. Awesome, awesome. Usually it's not, so that's where this efficiency curve is coming to play. All of these curves together go into selecting the best pump for your design. And really, it's the idea of minimizing your losses or getting the most flow rate possible. So now we can go on and describe these curves mathematically. So then you can kind of play with them. Okay, so what did we have? Well, let's look at, I have an efficiency curve. Okay, so for the efficiency curve, it's an eta curves function, and you have this power taken up by the fluid and by the work done by, the power to the shaft. So what you get, this is what you get, what you paid for. So that's how we're going to measure efficiency. So I know you all you all remember this equation for this. This is rho G Q and then an H A. Right? So maybe what's this HA actually in terms of how you actually would measure this darn thing, So if you had a pump, boom, boom. Here's a delta P that you can measure from suction to outlet, okay? And then if the delta Z is not too big, or actually the delta V is not that big, it's basically moving the same speed, all you change is the head, Then you have, the actual pump head, rho G, and then you have this Z, and then you have this sort of 2G. So you can even actually calculate these two things to get really rigorous in the measurements of them, but you'd actually just get this value of power supplied by the fluid this way. So do it that way. Measuring pressures is pretty easy. You'll see the difference there. It could only be probably 10 centimeters, or could be not too big and then not too big. So that's how you can get a from measurement, and that would give you a value to plug in for your efficiency and actually create an efficiency plot. then you actually have to know to a reasonable accuracy how much power you're actually providing it. So let's put it up there again, but in barleycorn units, it's the same thing, right? And then this is going to be divided by, right? So for SI, SI units, it's just this, and then for here, this is going to be in barleycorn units. Okay, you just divide by 550, and that goes with the added thing that your HA needs to be in feet. Rho G has to be, what was that, pound per foot cubed, and then your Q is in S. So these are the units that have to work for the power supplied to the fluid to get the horsepower. Right, so you already did that with the project enough, though, so I don't actually need to go over it too much. What was the system curve? So the efficiency is just a ratio of two things. You could actually calculate that worked prior to the shaft even. We had a term for that in the first lecture on the Euler equation, but you don't really do that. You just measure these things, make your efficiency plots, and work from there. Okay, so the system curve, right? So a system curve, or really that pump curve, right? What is that? That's going to be, it's going to look like this. Okay? And it's important. Okay? We have an initial delta Z, then K total in the Q. Where does this come from? Well, it just comes from Bernoulli's again, right? G, Z, ZA, G, V plus Z, plus I got plus another V squared. This is at point B, and then you have losses. Okay. So really, it's the system. So rearranging these things and making the assumptions, right? Equal pressures on the end, maybe different elevations, right? Same velocities on the end, etc. You get that very simplified version. If they weren't, they would just make a larger constant right here with stuff you would measure. So keep that in mind as well, that the idea of relating this thing to a flow rate like this, it would still look like this no matter what assumptions you're putting on these, because you could just rewrite it correctly, right? But in the end, you're going to have sort of this. Maybe I should think of it as like an H naught, a minimum starting point based on either elevation changes, these changes, just say straight up the difference of these two things. There's just a knot, and then you have this K total. And you can go back to the notes to see how you could actually write this whole K total in terms of the minors losses, the major losses. All those viscous losses can be summed up in some fluid resistance term. It's a giant summation, has M and N components. I already did that stuff, but just, right. The important thing to take away is that it looks functionally like this. Constant value, after you plugged all the numbers in, times Q squared. So that's the idea that this functional form will look like this. And you can kind of know how to plot it from that, right? So you should then also appreciate how many ways you can change this, right? You had all this stuff to calculate different diameters, different materials and things like that that were all affecting this. Well, the flow rate was a constant cell on your spreadsheet you just kept referring back to. So the only change you had design-wise was sort of tweaking this K value based on things that you had, right? So ways to change K can become important for pump systems where these losses matter a lot, right? So there are a ton of variables that go in to it, right? I wrote this on before. So how about I go M major and M minor, but I've done effective length so I can write it the exact same way, right? That's really why I like the effective length stuff, because then I can focus on it like this, right? Here's the FIs that you had, FA, 8, and then I have a pi squared, D, 5, okay? And then it's all at the same flow rate, okay? Q squared. K total, right, is a variable of all these different parameters you have in your system to tweak. Before you can graphically show that, right, let's look at, you could just functionally think of it now this way, right? So then just looking at this expression, I know that the total fluid resistance I have, just inspecting, right? Remember in here, right, F is a function of what? It's a function of the velocity, flow rate. It's even a function of flow rate as well. That's important. So maybe not Darcy. I should maybe give a capital F for a function. Just the idea that the total fluid resistance that comes up in this system curve, it's a function of the flow rate. It's a function of the diameters. It's a function of the length of the pipe. And it's a function of roughness of the pipe. Right? You could also think of it this way. A nested function, here's, right, I know the whole thing's a function. It's a function of the Darcy friction factor, which is a function of the Reynolds, and a function of roughness. And then same thing, now it's a function of L, and the function of diameter, K. And that's this nested function concept of how this fluid resistance is sensitive to different properties. I'm over, I have to make another video. So maybe we'll go into now the idea of, you just understand that you can alter this constant K value or approximate K value in front of this flow squared term for the system curve. And you already have a sense of how to do things like that, but let's just graphically see what that's going to be doing to our pump system curves.